Okay, Phil, we are live.
Thank you. Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everyone. We are glad to have you with us today. You may be joining us live or asynchronously. So wherever and whenever you're joining us, we're glad to have you with us. We are recording the program. You may have heard that at the very beginning. Welcome you all to Retain Kentucky's Lunch and Learn webinar series on return to work. This is our sixth entry in the Lunch and Learn webinar series. The title of our program today is Everyone is a Job Developer, Active Citizenship to Build the Inclusion Economy. I'm Phil Rumrell with the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. And with me today is my friend and colleague, Kimberly Wickert, also of HDI, Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. Kimberly's going to introduce herself in just a moment. But Kimberly, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
We are on the first slide here. A little bit of a housekeeping item. We have and are grateful to Ben Cook and Brandon Canada, our media and communication and IT specialists who are here with us on the call and helped us to get the word out on today's program. So Brandon and Ben, thank you for your assistance. Brandon will be monitoring the chat for us. So you can put questions or comments. We'd love to have them in the chat, and we'll periodically stop and ask Brandon if there are any items in the chat as we need to go. You can also electronically or manually raise your hand if you prefer, and we'll answer your questions and comments in real time. And hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions, comments, and discussion. Kimberly, if you go to the next slide, please. This is just our acknowledgement and disclaimer. We are grateful for the support of the United States Department of Labor through the Retain network that funded large workforce development grants for each of 5 states. Kentucky was fortunate enough to be one of those states. This program and the entire webinar series is supported with funding by the United States Department of Labor. We're grateful for their support, and they always ask us to make the disclaimer that the opinions and perspectives that we express here in this program are those of ourselves, the presenters. They do not necessarily reflect the policies of the Department of Labor or the priorities of the federal government. So Kimberly, I think we have disclaimed that, so we're good there. You go to the next slide, just a little bit about myself. First, I'm calling in today, but Kimberly is on the video portion, so I'll give a visual description of myself in the interest of universal design. I'm a 56-year-old white male. I have hazel-colored eyes. I am mostly bald. Pronouns are he, his, and him. I'm wearing a red University of Arkansas golf shirt today. I'm sitting in front of a nondescript background and foreground in my home office. I am a professor of counselor education and director of research in the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. I've been in that role since 2020. I grew up in Vermont and went to school at Keene State College and the University of Arkansas. Keene State is in New Hampshire. My own research interests focus on the education and employment of people with disabilities, and we do a lot of work in the area of neurodiversity and neurodivergence, populations like people with multiple sclerosis and autism and traumatic brain injury. We study services and outcomes in the state federal vocational rehabilitation program, workplace discrimination. and broader notions of workforce development and how to build an economy that includes workers with disabilities and people with all characteristics as a way of alleviating our national labor shortage and continuing what has been for many years a strong and vibrant American economy. Kimberly, we'll go to the next slide. Love to have you introduce yourself, and then you're going to do the first few content slides after that. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Rumrill. I am Kimberly Wickert, and I am a Gen X female with glasses and blonde hair. I am Caucasian, and I am sitting in a home office with a blurred background. I've got a black sweater and a black and white shirt on. Still a little chilly in my part of the world today. I grew up in Ohio. I attended Kent State University, Wright State University, and the Ohio State University. I am currently the Director of Organizational Partnerships for Retain Kentucky, and really excited to be here today with a lot of my favorite people from Retain to talk about this subject. And in addition to job development, other interests that I have are stay at and return to work services, which can include case management, vocational evaluation. And I also really enjoy elder care as an interest professionally and personally as well. So with that, I would just say, before we go into some of the content, Dr. Rumrill, I was thinking, in full disclosure, over the past couple of decades, you and I have done a lot of job development together. We've worked with students who, I've recruited in my former role that you've had in your programs. And I've seen your job development skills, which are very impressive, and would say I wouldn't be sitting here right now if it weren't for your job development skills. So I think we have a lot of things to share specific to that, but it's just as I was
thank you. That's very
Go.
kind of you. A bit of an exaggeration, but thank you. I'll take it and right back at you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So it's been fun working together on this, just kind of reminiscing about our partnership over the last few decades. And today we're going to share some of that by telling you about strategies that you can match workers with disabilities to available jobs in their labor market. And we're going to talk about employer engagement strategies. And then lastly, how you as a disability advocate can become part of the human resource pipeline and really help build that national workforce that includes people with disabilities. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started and talk about strategies to match workers to available jobs in the community. And my experience has been that you really need to start out by knowing the worker's capacities to work. And so as the disability advocate or the case manager or the vocational specialist, return to work coordinator, it's really your role to make sure that you have that information and that you also ensure that your client or consumer or participant is aware of that information as well, and that they know what their capacities are specific to work. And ways that you can help them gather that information is through a functional capacity evaluation, where we can look at what they can do specific to a work day and their physical abilities, specific to how the Department of Labor breaks down how somebody can work in an 8-hour workday. We can also look at their cognitive and psychological capacities as well, and give them objective data about that. Another way that we can gather objective data is through a vocational evaluation to determine how they can then use those capacities to work. And I mentioned psychological information in the functional capacity evaluation, you could also use a mental capacity checklist that can be completed by their healthcare provider who's treating them for that diagnosis as well. And that really gives the worker the understanding of what they can do. And early on in my career, I had the opportunity to work with someone who I considered a mentor. Her name was Marie Finan, and she was a case manager, and she had shared with me how important it was for our clients and workers to really be able to present their capacities to employers. And she used an analogy. She had one worker who was really focused on finding his life partner, his wife, or starting out with a girlfriend. And she said to him, you know, if you were going on a date with someone for the first time, would you tell them, you know, what you can bring to the table? And he said, absolutely. And she said, that's what you want to do with an employer too. And I thought that was a good analogy. You know, you really want to focus on what you can do, and put everything and frame everything in that perspective. So we're going to move along and talk about strategies that we can use to help workers find jobs that are available in the community. And one of those ways is through a community-based work assessment. And you can check with your state vocational rehabilitation agency or organization to determine what it is that they have to offer. But generally, a community-based work assessment or work experience allows an individual to go into an actual work setting with an employer, usually with a job coach on site with them, and really determine what it is that they can do in that work environment. A work assessment can outline what I just mentioned. What is it that that person can bring to the table? What skills and attributes do they have that we can really expand upon? But it can also identify areas that they may need a little bit more training, or areas that they may need some improvement as well. So that's a great opportunity. You may also have heard of a community-based work experience, where maybe they're looking to get some additional experience on their resume. And that can also be a great way to go into an actual employer setting and get that additional experience. We do have some employers who have a temporary work program or a reserve pool, and that's another great way to get somebody in the door, get them in a seat at an employer, and help them get to know that employer, help that employer get to know them, and really help match them with those available jobs in the community. There are programs called Modified Duty Offsite, and those programs are used by employers oftentimes when somebody is ill or injured, and it could be work-related or not work-related, but that person can go back to work, but not in their job that they were working before their illness or injury. And so maybe the employer places them at a nonprofit or charitable organization to be able to contribute to the community, to keep them working while they're continuing to recover. And what we found with that is that that can often expand somebody's skill set. I've had clients who were really relied upon their physical work skills prior to their illness or injury, but then when they went to work in a modified duty offsite program at a nonprofit organization, they tapped into, let's say, some clerical or administrative type of skills that they had never used before, and really expanded their skill set. And I've had a few people who weren't able to go back to their pre-injury or illness job, but were able to move into a different job with their employer after expanding that skill set. So that's another way to match somebody to available jobs within the community, or in these cases, within the employer. Some programs, vocational rehab or through state workers' comp, have work trial programs where somebody can go to an employer on a trial basis with the support of that state entity and try that program out. And sometimes there is financial support for the employer to do so. And that's the same with on-the-job training, where somebody can learn the skills of the job, sometimes with the support of a job coach as well. And there's some financial support for employers to do so. The last couple of things here, did you want to say something, Phil?
No.
Okay. The last couple of things here are informational interviewing. And this is really important. If somebody's interested in a position, but really wants to learn more about it, we can provide them with a list of questions specific to that role and connect them with an employer and an individual at that employer who's already working in that role, and have them ask them those questions. If that seems to be successful and they seem to feel like they want to learn more about that, we can also take it to the next step and see if they can do some on-site job shadowing just to learn more about that job. And I have seen those types of situations evolve into job opportunities for people because they've made that connection with that employer, with that person who's working in that job. So that's another strategy to keep in mind. And then the last one here is unpaid or volunteer work. And I've had individuals with whom I've had the opportunity to work that have volunteered at organizations to get that work experience and then put that on their resume as unpaid experience. And employers really gravitate towards that because, number one, it's experience in the role that the person is looking to go into in a paid position, but it also says a lot about that individual's motivation. If they're willing to learn by volunteering and helping out in that capacity, I think that speaks a lot to an employer as well. So those are a few strategies to be able to match workers to jobs within the community. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Phil, for the next few slides.
Thank you. Brandon, is there anything in the chat, or we'll pause here and take any questions or comments anybody might have?
No questions in the chat, Phil.
Okay. Kimberly, before I do go on, I wonder if I might just go back to something that struck me from your first slide or so once we got into the to the content, having to do with the mental and psychological capacities. It seems to me that those skills and abilities and capacities and tolerances that people have on the psychological side have become really even more important. I think, certainly since the pandemic, but if you think about in the last 5 or 6 years, things that were happening in our communities, how we deal with issues of difference, political division, and vitriol, things like that, and just the overall public health and mental health climate, that our society is in. It seems that mental health concerns in the workplace have really taken on greater import. And with that, even though they're harder to measure, arguably, than physical capacities, I feel like we're seeing these things really become more important, even though they're harder to really get a hold of, but they do have perhaps a greater bearing than ever on that match between the worker and the job in question. So I wondered if you had any reflections on that, or if you're seeing it the same way.
Absolutely. I agree. And, in talking to employers, and in fact, our employer that we had for the employer seminar series in April, Sarah Dixon from Unified Sign and Design and Sign, said that, they have very much identified that as well as an employer and want to help support their workers. And so some of the ways that they do that is through unlimited PTO and having supports that people, an open door policy, encouraging people to talk about some of the needs that they have specific to their wellness from a psychological perspective. So, and I agree, this really was blossomed throughout the pandemic. And I think I've said in the past, having done workers' comp, a lot of times as employers, I think we would kind of not want to talk about mental health at all and really just avoid that. And now we're having those conversations, and we still have a long way to go, but we definitely have progressed in the last 5 years.
Thank you. Thank you. If we go to the next slide, this gets into some very specific employer engagement strategies that we recommend as ways that any of us in the disability advocacy or service area can put into place to help to build the inclusive economy that I believe everyone here on this call is seeking. So it's just a screenshot of a book that we did a few years ago called Foundations of the Vocational Rehabilitation Process. This is a textbook that's used fairly widely in graduate training and rehabilitation counseling, and part of the process of working with people with disabilities in the vocational rehabilitation, private or public sectors, has to do with engaging what we call the demand side of employment, and that is the employer. The employers have a demand for workers. We have a supply of workers if we're rehabilitation professionals or members of the disability community, and making those matches becomes very important. And so in the book, we have a kind of a 4-strategy sequence that rehabilitation professionals, even as you're providing direct services on the supply side to workers with disabilities, a 4-part strategy for engaging employers. And we've come to realize that we have a lot of expertise and value to offer the employer in terms of content information about inclusion in the workplace, reasonable accommodations and assistive technology, which our colleagues, Dr. Shepard-Jones and Christina Espinosa, talked about in the last program. ADA implementation and consultation, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and literally becoming part of the human resource process with and on behalf of employers. We see that when that happens, we're not just helping workers with disabilities one at a time enter, re-enter, or stay in the workforce. We're addressing it on the systems and environmental levels as well, and softening the ground, so to speak, for opportunities for many more people to join the economy. And the economy needs workers now, arguably, not arguably, I think, more than they ever have at any point in recorded history. So finding where the jobs are, if we go to the next slide, Kimberly, that's employer engagement strategy number 1, finding out where the jobs are, what they are, where they are, et cetera. And one thing that you can take for granted, I think, is that jobs are going to be available. If you're looking for jobs right now, you're going to find employers who are hiring. We know that 50 million Americans had some interruption of employment during the first couple of waves of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and 21. That's just an incredible number of people who had their employment interrupted. Most of those people did end up going back to work, not all, but 20 million new jobs were created during or have been created since 2021 in our national economy. We've got a record low, near record low unemployment rate of about 4.2% right now. We know that on a national scale, there are 2 job openings for every available worker in our national economy. So if someone's looking for work, there are going to be abundant opportunities for them. And yet, as we've talked about in other of these webinars, we still have a persistent problem with employment and labor force participation among people with disabilities. The employment to population ratio for working age adults with disabilities has languished at around 40% for many years, and we can't seem to really move the needle on that. So we have people with disabilities who are underrepresented in the workforce at a time when there are many jobs available and many jobs going unfilled in your local, state, and in the national economy. And we need to do a better job of making those matches. And it first starts, we think, with finding out where those jobs are. And for that, the first thing we would commend to your attention is the U.S. Department of Labor's ONET system for labor market information. Just visit this site. It's self-guided. It tells you about the demand for particular occupations in local, state, and national economies. It talks about jobs that are open, how much they pay. You can put in a zip code and it will link to jobs that are currently posted as an accountant in Santa Clara, California, for example, and will tell you who's hiring, who they are. You can link to the application if you like, but a tremendous way to help people learn more about the availability of jobs in their chosen field, who's hiring and in what areas, and in fact, what the outlook is for workers in particular fields. But if all politics is local, then all job development is local too. So we have to have that national perspective, but then we have to engage in our communities and find out who is doing the hiring, what kinds of jobs are available in the local economy, getting to know employers, and we've got some ideas about how to do that. Not just the specific jobs and occupations that employers are hiring for, but what kinds of workers are they wanting? And this sort of gets to the capacity and tolerance information that Kimberly was talking about. If we know the sorts of workers, so the employer says, yes, I have these 5 jobs, but we're really looking for workers who have these particular skills, then we can match people we know with disabilities, without disabilities, it doesn't matter, to those particular demands or requirements for the kind of worker that employers want. So we're looking to place people into particular jobs that may be open, but also looking to match the qualifications of our folks with the preferred credentials and characteristics that employers see as important in their best workers. And when we help in any way at all to make those matches, the match between the person's skills and the employer's requirements, we know that this makes the person more likely to get a job in the first place. It makes them more likely to keep a job over a period of time. And the quality of that bond between the employee and the employer goes way up with a strong match, long-term job satisfaction and for the worker, and long-term productivity for the employer ensue when we make those connections as close as we possibly can. We also know that many of the jobs that are had or gotten in this economy happen even before the posting is out. So employers are posting. You can ask employers if they're hiring. So you're out to dinner, you're at the movie theater. You may see signs where people say help wanted, but now you're starting to see signs that say we're always hiring, just ask. And even when they don't, it's worth checking to see if they do. Sometimes they're not posting those because they really feel they've flooded the market already. But when you ask an employer if they're hiring, what we find is they very often are. So we don't want to wait to see the ad in the newspaper. We don't want to wait to see the want ad. If you're working with someone or you are someone who's looking for work in a particular area and you know of an establishment that hires people to do that kind of work, inquire directly even before the position comes available. Pause here, Brandon. Anything in the chat, or would anyone like to ask a question or make any comment at this time?
Nothing in the chat, Phil.
Okay. Kimberly, did I miss anything just on finding where the jobs are? I'm sure I missed a lot because it's a short presentation, but anything you'd like to add there?
No, I think you did a great job covering everything. I would just expand a little bit upon, take it even outside of like an employer. maybe, if you are involved in any kind of social, if you have children that play sports and you're looking for a particular role for somebody, ask them, hey, where do you work? Are you hiring? And we still know that about 75% of people get their jobs through some sort of connection or network. And so, expand it to anybody at church or, organizations or social groups that you might be in, and let those folks know that, you're looking for a job, or you're looking for a job for someone that you're working with, a client or consumer. And, most people like to talk about what they do for work. That's usually, in social context, what we ask people first and foremost, but that's also a really great lead to be able to develop jobs for other people as well.
Absolutely right. Yeah, no doubt. Making those kind of connections, and it really is through those informal social networks where most jobs are had, isn't it? Yeah, it's we'd like to think that it's through the formal channels, but it really is about who you know and letting people know. And if you yourself are looking for work and you're getting a job become a full-time job, let people know that you're seeking employment, as Kimberly was talking about that, first date of the job interview, whatever it might be. Let people know what you're looking for, particularly in this economy. As you start asking, you're going to find opportunities that you probably didn't even know about just by beginning that conversation. So very, very important. So in that process of active citizenship, if we go on to the next slide, what we're really talking about is establishing ourselves as disability advocates and service providers and members of the disability community. Why don't we become known to employers as a labor supply resource? This is one of the things that employers look to rehabilitation professionals and the disability community, disability advocates often, for. Once they get to know that we're working with people who have disabilities, they will come to us about applicants. So we don't have to always be soliciting the employer. Once they know that we've got workers who are ready to work, that increases the likelihood that those strong matches get made. So we talk a lot about, and in our retain projects, worked with our return to work coordinators to literally become part of the employer community in their localities. Chambers of Commerce are a terrific connection. These are community, civic-minded community leaders, business leaders who have joined together to make their communities a better place. The Chamber of Commerce knows everyone who's doing business in town. They know everyone who is hiring. They're represented among leaders in the business community, and they have programs at the local and state and even national levels all the time about opportunities in particular industries, or opportunities for particular types of workers. For veterans, for example, Chambers of Commerce sometimes have programs, second chance programs for people who have justice system involvement. Kimberly and I participated in an inclusive workforce a hiring academy. Kimberly, with the state, the Kentucky State Chamber of Commerce, had a good number of attendees there who were understanding that the valuable labor resource that exists within the disability community. And we just can't say enough about the Chamber of Commerce network and getting involved with these folks who are in hiring authorities, but have also presented themselves as being interested in the overall health and well-being of their communities. Very similarly, Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, other kinds of philanthropic and social organizations, Rotary clubs and Lions clubs in particular, are made up of business leaders. Rotary clubs have to have an employment-related program or a jobs program as part of their charter. So we've known a lot of folks who are in the inclusive workforce business who literally join Rotary clubs and come and talk with folks about the work that they do, about particular individuals they're working with who may be looking for work. And again, here we have business leaders who are looking to make a difference and looking to make those matches. You'll also in your communities and at the state level have workforce development boards, a growing phenomenon, and these are going to be really interdisciplinary constituents of people who are looking for ways to make sure that all the business opportunities that can be had within a particular community are being actualized, and that all of the opportunities for people to work and get jobs and contribute to the economy are being made. So getting involved with your local or state workforce development boards, certainly the Society for Human Resource Management. This is a very large professional organization of, or SHRM we call it, of people who work in the human resources business. They certainly know who's hiring within their organizations. And the SHRM, the human resource managers, are often the ones who are responsible for workplace accommodations that workers with disabilities. Sometimes they're involved in the workers' compensation and other elements of disability management. So we find, Kimberly, that folks in SHRM are very much oriented to the inclusion enterprise and the inclusion economy, and this is a great contact as well. SHRM has state chapters in most states, and they have great state level as well as national conferences. Visit their website, and here's a way to connect with large numbers of HR professionals. We would also recommend professional organizations in particular fields, as well as trade unions, as very fertile sources of employment opportunities and ways of making those kinds of connections. The organizations themselves and trade unions themselves sometimes do the hiring, but more often they will know about who is hiring in a particular space. And so you just can't know enough of these folks in your efforts to become an internal member of the employer community in your own community. And really, that's all I wanted to say about that. I think we got a couple more strategies. I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And as I was listening to you, I also have experienced the importance of those direct connections with local employers. And through our Retain program, we've also partnered with the Coalition for Workforce Diversity in Kentucky, and they are growing. And that's a really great way to make those direct connections with local employers. As well, I would also say I've found that, if you're helping someone find a job, or if you yourself are looking for a job, you're going to have to go through the protocol that the employer has established. So that might be that they have a recruiter or recruiting organization that they're working with, or, you go through their online process to submit your resume or fill out application questions. And sometimes those applicant tracking systems, or ATS, if they don't find the right words in somebody's resume, you might not get to the next step. So those direct connections with local employers are really important. We've had a handful of employers that they will say, if we say, hey, we have somebody who we think would be a great fit, they'll say, okay, have them, go ahead and apply online, but also send me a copy of their resume, because that way, if they're using a recruiter and they don't get past that level, or if the applicant tracking system doesn't take them to the next level, that employer can review their resume and move them forward if they agree that they're a good match. So I just like to really kind of emphasize to, get those connections with those local employers. And that's just an added layer to be able to help somebody get into that position. And, you're continuing to establish yourself as a labor supply resource. So I think I'm on for strategy number 3, and this is where we're helping employers with their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And yes, we still have employers who who are promoting DEI initiatives. And there are several ways that we can help them. One of those ways is through ADA consultation and implementation. And Dr. Rumrell is one of our experts in that area and has done a lot of work helping employers train them and educate them on implementing that, as well as disability awareness training. And, this is something even for employers who go through disability awareness, it's what we like to say is something that needs to be done on a regular basis. Things change within the disability community. So it's important for employers to keep up with their disability awareness training. We talked about, becoming a labor supply resource, but you can also become a direct referral source for employers, and they can become a referral source for you as well. So keep that in mind. You can help employers fill their jobs. And if they have someone who may not be a great fit for them, but they know that you might have other employers who are looking for folks, they could send somebody your way as well. So keep that in mind. Workplace accommodations and assistive technology is another way that we can support employers in their DEI initiatives. And we have the win-win approach to reasonable accommodations. That is a great tool. You can find that on our HDI and Retain website that can help an individual walk through requesting their accommodation. That can be a really emotional thing to do, especially for somebody who may be recently ill or injured or has had an exacerbation and is dealing with navigating all of that and then asking for a workplace accommodation. So it's something that Dr. Rumrell has led and authored, and it's a great tool to help people navigate that. Assistive technology is another way that employers can be supported in their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And Dr. Rumrell mentioned one of our division directors, Christina Espinoza, who leads our assistive technology. And it's a great way for employers to help support workers and continue their DEI initiatives. The Job Accommodation Network is another way that we can help support employers. We can introduce them to JAN and also the ADA Centers National Network. And it's a whole host of resources and experts that can help them and on a global basis within their workplace, but also on an individual basis as well. We talked about disability awareness training, but we can also inform disability management and occupational health and safety practices. So we can be a subject matter expert for employers in their DEI initiatives when they need help with navigating safety practices, risk management, occupational health, that type of thing. And they will appreciate your content expertise and your role as a broker of high quality employees and really connecting them with those workers and with experts in the resources that we've just outlined. I'm going to check the chat here. And Chelsea said she's working for Goodwill's Young Adult Opportunity Center. Oh, let's see. Sorry about that. Dr. Shepard Jones said in the chat, the Center for Assistive Technology Services. Thank you so much for putting that link in there. That's where you can find great support for employers to be able to help them in their DEI initiatives. Dr. Rumrell,
Absolutely.
anything that you want to add on any of that?
No, we also did you mention, Kimberly, and I just blocked it, did we talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act National Network, the ADA Centers National Network?
Would be great if you could expand upon it. I just glossed over it. So if you could take
No,
it,
no,
that would be
okay.
great.
These are regional centers that focus on the implementation of all 5 titles of the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's one in each region of the United States. It's adata.org, an easy one to remember, and it will direct you to your, based on if you tell them where you live, it will direct you to your own regional center. And in ways similar to the Job Accommodation Network, but even more broadly, I think, as far as ADA implementation. And remember that Title I of the ADA has to do with employment, and that's by design. That's how important employment was as a civil rights matter, as it is in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So the ADA Centers National Network, another terrific resource, toll-free and online resource. They provide training, webinars, direct consultation, very much in the way that that Jan does, and having access to both of those resources very, very important as well. So we commend them to your attention too.
Thank you for expanding on that. Okay, so we are going to round up to strategy 4 and how you can become part of the human resource process. And we've touched on this a little bit with, networking with SHRM and, getting to know employers at that local level. And you can pre-screen workers as applicants for the employer. That really would solidify that relationship with your human resource networks at that local level of employer. So what do we mean by pre-screening workers? So know what the employer wants. We've talked about that. What are they looking for in a worker? Do they need somebody who has a certain set of credentials? Do they need someone who has a high school diploma or a GED? Do they need to know that somebody's going to pass a drug test? What is their justice involved background? Those are all ways that you can pre-screen workers for that employer and pass those workers along to the employer. So keep that in mind. You can also assist workers with online applications, because that could be very helpful to get them through that process and get them to that next level for the employer. You can help workers by doing what we call mock interviews, get them ready for those virtual, in-person interviews or phone interviews. No matter how good somebody is at interviewing, practice really helps. So help them do that. Help them script. What are the things that their strengths are? In any interview, that question is going to come up in some form. So, get them really comfortable with talking about what their strengths are. Get them comfortable with talking about, why they're interested in working for an employer. Help them research employers. And that'll really get them to that next level and help that employer and you become part of that human resource process. Help them negotiate job offers and get to that point of being hired and onboarded with employers. Sometimes it's difficult navigating some of those negotiations that people might be uncomfortable with. So help them know what questions that they may be asked during the job offer process and ways that they can navigate those as well. In some cases, you may want to suggest technology. We talked about assistive technology. Dr. Shepherd-Jones put the link in the chat, or other accommodations needed to start or maintain jobs. And I think that's really important, that people are aware of, what accommodations that they may need. One of the things that that I've seen in working with people in the job accommodation process is sometimes it can be really overwhelming when they get the paperwork. They, request that the job accommodation, that interactive process gets started, and then they get paperwork asking for medical information. And that's one way that you can jump in and, help them identify an accommodation and really help them navigate that process to know what medical provider they may need to go to get that documentation. Just because somebody may be treating with 5 different medical providers doesn't mean they need to send that paperwork to all 5 providers. It's really just the provider that's treating them for that accommodation that they need. We can also help by helping an employer find a replacement when a worker leaves a job. So, you have that network, you've become a resource for that labor supply that we talked about in a previous strategy. And that employer can begin to lean on you to help them find replacements. When you have a few successes and they've had workers that you've sent to them that have been a great fit and a great match, and it's a success story, and you can help them as people, move on. Maybe these are entry level positions that people are moving up within the company, or they're moving into different roles outside of the company. Helping that employer find a replacement is a great way to support them in the human resource process. And then through these strategies, you become that link, and an important one in the chain of referral, application, interviewing, hiring, onboarding, retaining that individual. That's huge. Once somebody invests so much time and energy into recruiting and hiring that person, they want that person to stay at that job. So you can help in that retention process and really in the ongoing workforce development. So I'm going to pause there and ask you, Dr. Rummerl, if there's anything that you would like to add to any of that.
No, I just think that I really appreciate all of those points, and that idea of you establish a relationship with an employer, you send them 4 or 5 folks, most of them work out, sometimes one doesn't, and you go back to the employer and say, look, I understand, no hard feelings here. Let's help this person who didn't work out find another place that's more suitable for them, and let's help you fill this position with someone else that we might have in mind. And the success that you've built from giving them good referrals, previously, gives you that kind of credibility to do that. Not every time when we do this does it always work out. There's all kinds of reasons why it may not. So as the employer sees you as having an investment in each referral that you make, and cycling back through to help folks, or even so, what I'm saying, Kimberly, is that even an unsuccessful placement can help to strengthen the connection that you have with the employer, because you can help the worker find something else. You can help the employer find a worker who's a better fit, and they come to appreciate that over time. And that kind of effort is what takes the job development process beyond the one person at a time approach, right? This is really making inroads into that larger system. And if nothing else today, that's what we've wanted to emphasize as much as anything else, the important role we have to play as active citizens and agents of change within our communities who become part of that employer network and human resource process.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And I like how you outlined, most of the time, the folks that we're going to send to employers are going to be successful, but occasionally you may have someone who may not be a good fit. And I think just being accountable and letting the employer know they can come back to you in those situations really will solidify the relationship with the employer, and like you said, help that individual move to a better fit as well. So those are all great points. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions. Dr. Shepherd-Jones did put the Southeast ADA link in the chat as well, so thank you for that. We're going to go ahead, and we've got a few minutes left here, and just talk about disability advocates as part of the human resource pipeline. And some of the ways that we can do this, and we mentioned success stories, and those are huge. To be able to share your success stories with employers and really with other partners within the workforce development systems is a great way to become part of that human resource pipeline. We've mentioned state vocational rehabilitation organizations. Partnering with them is a great way to become part of that pipeline as well. We've also mentioned the Chamber of Commerce, and so there are state as well as local Chamber of Commerce, and participating in those is a recommendation and strategy that we have. One of the other ways, and we've talked about the Society of Human Resource, but identifying your state and local SHRM or Society of Human Resource contacts. Dr. Rummerl, you mentioned our partnership with the Kentucky Chamber and the Disability Hiring Academy. And they also have a partnership with the Society of Human Resource Management. And so that was a great way for us to be able to connect with SHRM as well. So another strategy to become part of the human resource pipeline. We've talked about networking with professional organizations. Oftentimes people who are in those professional organizations, depending upon where they are in their career, have some time to be able to mentor individuals who may be looking to get into those fields or industries. So keep that in mind. And then I'm going to ask you, Dr. Rummerl, to expand upon this, because I know you've been very active in these over the years, but getting involved with disability advocacy organizations like the ARC, National Multiple Sclerosis Society, Autism Speaks, TASH, American Association of Persons with Disabilities. And I think there are multiple ways that you've done that. Are you able to kind of expand upon that a little bit for us?
Yeah, those are just some examples, folks, but we think it's very important if we're looking at large employer organizations, we're looking at professional organizations as well. Why not get involved as much as we can with the organizations that represent the needs of people with disabilities? Most of these organizations are categorically specific. In other words, they represent people with specific kinds of disabilities, but some are not, like the American Association of Persons with Disabilities. And many of these larger advocacy organizations have employment programs. Some of them have research program grants that they award for people who are doing interesting things related to services and supports to build an inclusive economy. And so it's just another way of connecting both on the supply and demand side. So on one hand, if you register and get to know folks at the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, you'll get to know many folks with MS who are interested in either getting back into the workforce following diagnosis or in retaining the job they have. But those organizations will also have relationships with employers and professional organizations and other disability organizations as well, to help to continue to make those kinds of connections. And the concerns that folks with MS, there are some things in common that are specific to that particular disability or a particular injury or illness or condition. And getting this just sort of leverages more of the advocacy orientation to what we're talking about. And we work with those organizations in particular and many others, really in all of those capacities. There's just another valuable resource if we're looking at matching workers with disabilities to available jobs in their communities to support the national economy, these organizations are going to have a vested interest in there as well. So part of active citizenship, we think, could and even should involve getting connected with them.
Thank you. And with that, we are right at the top of the hour, and we'll check here, see if we have any other questions or comments. Let's see here. Okay, so Benjamin said, thank you all for joining. Please join us for our next Lunch and Learn installation, Role of Healthcare Providers in Return to Work, this Thursday, May 8th from 12 to 1.
Here,
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, time flies. Kimberly, it's a great pleasure as always. Appreciate your willingness to share your time and expertise with our group here. And folks, those of you who are tuning in, either synchronously or asynchronously, we are grateful for your time and attention, and we appreciate everything you are doing to help to build the inclusion economy and focusing on return to work and stay at work supports for Americans with disabilities. Thank you all, and be well, and we hope to see you in just a couple days for the final installment of these Lunch and Learn programs. Always a pleasure. Kimberly, thank you, and thanks everyone.